for joining us. This is our third Twitter Space. I think we did two Twitter Spaces several months ago, and we're doing it now for obvious reasons because of the situation that we have in the region, the ethnic cleansing that happened in Nagorno-Karabakh. We're here to discuss it and to understand the consequences, as well as discuss the international reaction or the lack of reaction to it. Today I'm joined with Dr. Karina Avedisian, who is a senior analyst at the Regional Center for Democracy and Security. Our second speaker is Sheila Palin. She's a well-known international human rights lawyer, and I'm, of course, Tigran Grigorian, the head of the Regional Center for Democracy and Security. I would like to start our conversation with Karina, who spent several days in Goris while the refugees from Nagorno-Karabakh were entering Armenia. Karina, could you please present us what you saw in Goris? What were your impressions and what were the situation there?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, this is my first Twitter Spaces kind of ever, and certainly my first as senior analyst at the Regional Center for Democracy and Security. So just want to say thanks to everyone joining in. I was in Goris for a few days this past week, and I mean, I'm a political scientist, but I kind of wanted to present a little bit of my kind of personal observations, things I saw, impressions of the influx, really, like the refugees streaming in. So Goris was their first, so, listeners who might not know, Goris is the city in Armenia that's closest to Nagorno-Karabakh. And it was the main center city, kind of where the refugees would come in and get registered. Before they even got to Goris, they would pass through Gornizor. So the first kind of stop that they would have was obviously crossing the Hakkari Bridge. And then after that, they were kind of counted by representatives of the Armenian government. So this is how we know how many people were passing through. So they would kind of stop the cars and find out how many people were traveling. And this is often where they would receive the first food that, first normal meal that they had in more than 9 months because of the blockade. And they would travel onwards. There was some volunteers, medical attention, if people were coming over, because, let's keep in mind the exodus, the forced exile was so jammed. I mean, a lot of people were traveling for, more than 20 hours, often as much as around 40 hours. So these people were in cars all this time. Some people needed medical attention, which they would receive at one of these points, and some food again, if they needed it. And then they would go on to Goris, where they would register. And overall, I just want to say, the numbers we're seeing are astronomical. I mean, we're talking about more than 100,000 people. And for Armenia's population of 2.5 million, this is huge. It's a population with a continuous historical presence in Nagorno-Karabakh of more than 2 millennia. But I think the sheer scale and totality of it doesn't really come through until you see the people coming in with almost nothing. I mean, families with 3 bags amongst them, children, elderly people riding in open-top trucks, families that were distraught, exhausted, not knowing where they were going to go next. And at the same time, we're told that, or as Rajan tells us, that they just decided to leave. And I think until you kind of see that kind of desperation, you don't really see the forces that are driving them out. So that's kind of the main overall impression that I wanted to communicate.
Thank you, Karina. Before moving forward with my second questions for Sheila, I would also ask you to talk a little bit about the reaction of the local population, the use of Goris. We've discussed this with you, and I would like you to share this with our audience as well, because it's really touching and heartwarming, the reaction these people received in Goris.
I think, yes, and I'm glad you asked that. If there's any kind of silver lining to any of this tragedy, it's really the youth of Goris, these volunteers. These were children, really, from around 9 years old to about 17, who were volunteering to pack sandwiches, put them in bags, kind of throw them into car windows as cars were passing by, boxes of juice. And then in the Goris center where people were registering, so this is, huge crowds of people with not much to their name, confused, not knowing where they're going to go next. And a lot of these kids were there. Actually, I saw, this girl, she was maybe around 15 years old, comforting distraught women, these women, adult women who are crying, and she's just comforting them. There was another old woman who was sitting in a wheelchair, looked, kind of confused. And this other girl had gone up to her and was just kind of, taking care of her, finding out what was, wrong, getting a bottle of water for her, getting some painkiller, giving her this water to drink. I mean, it was the empathy, the kindness that these locals showed these people coming in was just, honestly humbling and amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Karina. Now I would like to give the floor to Sheila. Sheila, we have been discussing the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh with you for a while. And I remember one of our conversations months before this tragedy happened, and we were discussing and comparing the situation with the context in Yugoslavia. And you were telling me back then that what Aliyev was doing already constituted ethnic cleansing, an attempt of ethnic cleansing. So now when we have an actual depopulation of Nagorno-Karabakh, a lot of politicians, foreign politicians, still hesitate to use that word. We saw Matt Mueller yesterday talking about evidence. He was saying that we need to evidence to use the word and to act. What is your take on that? Can we describe this situation as an actual ethnic cleansing?
Yeah, look, there are the reasons why people in positions like the spokesperson or Samantha Power, what have you, are reluctant to use the term is because it engages or triggers a sense of responsibility. It took years after the Rwandan genocide before people were able to start using the word genocide in the context of what was clearly a genocide. There was no doubt about it. But when he says when he talks about evidence, the way I see it, as a human rights lawyer who worked in these international criminal tribunals, is let's leave it to the judges to decide. But objectively, all the elements are already there. We have to remember also that, if we don't know, that ethnic cleansing, the term on its own, is not an independent crime. It can qualify as a crime against humanity or a war crime or even genocide if the legal elements of those things are met. But the thing that makes ethnic cleansing what it is, and I actually prefer to describe what we saw last week as a deportation as a crime against humanity, because it absolutely fits all the legal elements in my legal opinion. But it's basically when you've got the element of force, intimidation, or coercion. And this is the point that Azerbaijan is claiming. Nobody forced them. Nobody held a gun to their head. They left on their own free will. This is absolutely not true. You don't have to hold a gun to someone's head. You just have to create an environment that is so coercive or oppressive psychologically that creates so much fear that the person doesn't have a real choice but to leave. So even if it looks like they're consenting, if it's induced by force or the threat of force, it's not genuine. And in the lack of genuine consent, to be displaced from a place where one has been for, their whole life, nobody leaves with nothing, just like that, and especially the entire population, by choice. It's ridiculous, but it is a normal, it's an understandable effort from, of course, the perpetrator state to try to push this narrative because they don't want to face responsibility. And then on the other hand, those members of the international community for whom this is shocking because just days prior, not just days prior, I mean, for months we've been saying it, even for years, this is the reason why the Russian peacekeepers came in, was to prevent what we knew was going to come if they didn't step in. But it was even just days prior that we were warning of an imminent military attack. So it's like those members of the international community who either knew or should have known have to now deal with a certain level of this consequence. The responsibility to protect has been totally violated. And on some level, if this does qualify as a crime against humanity, which in my opinion it does, or according to some genocide, we have then a legal responsibility, and some form of reparation will have to be due.
Thank you, Sheila. Just a follow-up question. You talk about Rwanda, and you said that it took time until there was proper international reaction. Could you tell us in a more detailed way what can happen here from now on after the ethnic cleansing, the depopulation of Nagorno-Karabakh happened? What is required from the government of Armenia, from all the actors who are interested in actually pursuing with this policy, so that in the end, the perpetrators are somehow recognized as perpetrators or even punished?
I mean, well, we just voted yesterday to ratify the Rome Statute of the ICC, so there will be an avenue down that path, hopefully, that will bring us towards some individual criminal responsibility. That's a long road ahead, but that is one avenue, and the Armenian government is already doing its part by joining this very important institution that gives us the only real viable chance of having serious accountability in the form of someone goes to jail or people go to jail, right? But again, this can take years. Like when I worked at the Rwanda tribunal, it was 30 years after the genocide had happened. Same with the former Yugoslavia. The Cambodia tribunal, I mean, I penned the final judgment. The former head of state was in his 90s at that point. It's like these things take time, very, very unfortunately, but we're hoping it won't take that long. Otherwise, I definitely would hope that I don't expect that the Armenian government is going to weaponize the plight of these refugees. We have embraced them, and we are going to make sure that they don't lead the same kinds of lives that the IDPs had to live in Azerbaijan to somehow maintain their claims, right? There's no need for that. There are avenues for property, the violation of property rights to be restituted through the European Court of Human Rights. And there's a very serious grounds also for continued, to seek some form of accountability through the ICJ as well. And yeah, legally speaking, those are the things that we can do. And apart from that, I don't know. Like, I'm going to say only if we have regime change in Azerbaijan is there really a viable chance for Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh to be able to return. Any promise of we'll keep you safe, don't worry, come home, please. Like that's just not realistic or viable. So what they want is to go home and live back on their land, and to worship at the churches that are theirs. But not at the expense of their lives being in danger. Nobody does that. Nobody. It didn't happen anywhere in the history of the world where we throw people back into the lion's den.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you that without any kind of hard security guarantees and self-governing institutions, it's impossible to talk about any kind of secure Armenian presence in Nagorno-Karabakh, and that's why I don't think at this point it's realistic to talk about return. Now I would like to turn to the actual topic of this Twitter space, the international reaction or the lack of it. So we've seen a couple of muted statements from several actors, And we've seen that it seems that there is an attempt to actually downplay what actually happened, the scale of the tragedy. I've been talking to different diplomats in recent days, and I don't see any kind of willingness to actually move forward with bolder agenda. Karina, now I would like to listen to your take. Why is this happening? Do you think there is a chance to change these attitudes? And yeah, the floor is yours.
Thanks. I'd rather not give my, at this moment, very pessimistic kind of forecasts around this, but I did want to kind of bring the audience's attention to a couple things, and especially the EU. And it's the fact that we've been watching, right, over, at least the past 3 years and probably longer, how the EU has been treating Azerbaijan as if it is a good faith actor, even after evidence, even after facts, really, of it violating, the ceasefire agreement that ended the 2020 war, the points, enshrined within, even after its armed forces disseminated evidence of atrocities against Armenian civilians and POWs. And now, even after, literally committed ethnic cleansing in broad daylight, as it were. And yesterday we had Charles Michel talking about, how to build trust between Armenia and Azerbaijan now, moving forward. And he literally said, and I have this quote actually here, it says, it is now up to Azerbaijan to show goodwill, good faith, to protect the rights and security of the entire population living in Azerbaijan, including the Armenian population, which is, is one of the most cynical, messages that I've seen come from the EU in the last 3 years of, almost consistent cynical messaging. And it really demonstrates the failure of preventative diplomacy, and the kind of continuing forward as if preventative diplomacy is something that can, continue to be applied to this context. And it really signals the end of this kind of rights and norms-based liberal world order that the EU kind of pretends that still exists. And I think what's important to understand here for all actors involved, and in particular the EU, is how this can create it is creating a dangerous precedent for other autocratic states in particular to use force against small entities that claim self-determination to subjugate or destroy them in other parts of the world.
Yeah, that's actually the part that infuriates me the most. Like when they say that the needs and, the rights of the local population should be protected when there is any local population left, that's like the pinnacle of cynicism. We have several notable audience members like Alessia Vartanyan, Neil Hauer, Simon Markan, Siranur Sargsyan, who also had to travel all the way through from Nagorno-Karabakh, Hovhannes Nazaretian, and we will have the Q&A sections and we'll give an opportunity to others to join our conversation. But before that, I would like to give the floor to Sheila. Sheila, what's your take on this international reaction or the lack of it? I think you remember, right, our conversations in Brussels when we were in Brussels with our expert group. They were basically telling us that this would happen. I think you remember the question we asked about the possible reaction if this happens, and the 2 minutes long silence.
I guess because I worked in that world for so long, what I'm seeing, I'm very disappointed with the UN, but I always knew that the UN doesn't have the kind of teeth that we think it does. But I honestly see a difference, a very big difference. And yeah, it's really annoying to even hear any reference to good faith on Azerbaijan's part. But it's also like, what choice do they have but to continue to request it? The trust is broken. And I think that from my perspective, I'm seeing a reaction from the EU and the US that is strong, even in language. And some actions are actually suggesting that there has been a major shift. So I don't know everything that's going on behind the scenes. There's an MOU now that's been signed between Armenia and France for, to buy French military weapons. That's great. So, we're seeing a lot more support for Armenia, and hopefully that momentum, and for Nagorno-Karabakh, of course, will continue and grow. But the language is important, and I think that because the last 2 weeks have been horrible, it's easy to keep focusing on the negative, and because it does feel like too little too late. I had to deal with too little too late comments for my entire career, and I always said it's better late than never. So I wish we weren't where we are right now, because it could have been prevented. We know that, but we also have to understand that it's not. This isn't unique to Armenians. The too little too late happens all the time, and that's at least now. I think that the major key players have realized who they are dealing with. I mean, Azerbaijan has backed out of peace talks tomorrow. This is who we're dealing with, and there's no hiding from that anymore. But it's also important that we continue to shout and to demand and to fight, because it's not over yet.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not convinced that something has actually shifted in their attitudes because of all these meetings I've been having recently. I mean, this peace treaty has been fetishized for too long, and that's one of the reasons Azerbaijan actually managed to instrumentalize the importance that is given to this peace treaty by the US and the European Union and all the other countries to actually mitigate their possible reaction. And what is amazing to me, that even after the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh, some diplomats still keep talking about the need to be careful and cautious with Azerbaijan, because they might leave the negotiation table, or they might side with Russia. Everything has already happened, but they still are trying to be careful. I hope that there is a shift, but I'm not sure about that. But whatever, I think now it's time to give an opportunity to our listeners to become speakers. So if there is somebody who wants to join us to have a contribution or to ask a question, please raise your hand, send a request. And I'm not talking about Azerbaijani propagandists and regime apologists who are talking to us. We're not going to talk to them. Simon, maybe you want to chime in to say a couple of words. Okay, we have two requests. I believe Neil is the one. Both of you will be given an opportunity to speak. Neil, please go ahead.
Hey, thanks for hosting the space, and nice to talk to you guys. As you or many of you are probably aware, I was down in Doris and Corridor all last week, and dealing with this on the ground. And there's a million things to be said about that, but I think you all touched on a lot of the important stuff. Talking about what comes next in the international response. I had some interesting conversations the last few days as well with both on a conference call with people from France and talking to some people in Germany and whatnot. And I basically, I got the sense of two different things that I guess bad news. My bad news sense first was that there's not going to be any real consequences for Azerbaijan for this. Even on a call the other day with French MFA on a semi-public channel, they basically, their response was, "Oh, we need to impress upon Baku this is serious, but we can't be too serious with them. We can't be too mean to them because then they'll just stop talking to us and they'll go back to Russia and they'll do something like they just did again." And so this sort of idea that, and then a lot of talking about how France, we were the hardest ones pushing against them, and the whole time we were always speaking the most forcefully, but there's still a little appetite within the EU, and also we can't be too mean to them because then they go to Russia and they stop talking to us as if talking itself is the goal. So I got the sense that there's very little appetite from even within leading states on this in the EU at least to have any repercussions for Azerbaijan. I did that. I mean but I did get the sense that there is serious support for Armenia coming, including in tangible ways. I mean, we've seen that now with the French declaration, French sending of a defense attaché, defense mission here, and then the declaration that they are going to explore weapons purchases with Armenia, and in conjunction with training and organization and upgrading of the military and things like that. And I do think that I do get the sense that there's other support coming for Armenia in terms of, deterring an Azerbaijani attack, the next one on Armenia itself, on Sunik. And so, I mean, that's sort of, I try to find any silver lining in anything these days. It's kind of unbelievable and hollow feeling that Azerbaijan has just been allowed to do this, and I guess we have to just accept it. But anyways, that's my thought.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, at this point, the main priority is indeed the protection of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Armenia. And this is also what we are being told, that all the efforts are focused on that. I think another important issue where the international community needs to work on is, of course, the humanitarian crisis, because the Armenian government, I don't think, is well equipped to actually resolve the midterm and long-term problems of all the people who were forced to leave their homes. If there are other people, I see several other notable additions to our Twitter space, namely Dr. Artyom Donoyan, Dr. Vigen Cheterian. Very glad to see you, Artyom and Vigen. If you have anything to say, anything to contribute, please send a request. Okay, now we have a new speaker, an account or an organization called Christian Solidarity. Please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. This is Joel Veldkamp from Christian Solidarity International. We're an aid and advocacy organization, and we've been trying to do our small part to help the people of Artsakh for the past 10 months, and especially in the Christian world. And our efforts have obviously failed, so I offer my apologies for that to everyone on the call. But I was struck by something that Dr. Avedissian said, that this is not over yet, because we've been trying to think of what should we do now? What would be most helpful for a small organization like us that does place a high priority on the well-being of the people of Artsakh? What should we be advocating for? Should we be pushing ICC prosecutions really hard? Should we be focusing on Armenia, the Republic of Armenia's physical security? Should we be advocating for the hostages that Azerbaijan has taken in Nagorno-Karabakh? I'd love to get the whole panel's feedback on that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's a good question, and probably I'll start. I think all of the things you've just mentioned are surely important. We can probably add the preservation of the cultural and religious heritage in Nagorno-Karabakh. We have seen what has been happening with the churches and other religious sites that got under the Azeri control in 2020. The situation is not really good there. I think Simon Marakian could elaborate on that a bit if he wants to join us and he wants to have his say. But yeah, I think advocacy in all the directions is really important. It's really difficult to do something at this point because Nagorno-Karabakh is no longer Armenian. The Armenian population has left it, but there are still a lot of challenges. For me personally, the biggest challenge and the biggest actually problem will be the integration of the Armenian population coming from Nagorno-Karabakh into the Republic of Armenia. If we fail this process, then that will be the end of it, because we had this experience in the early 90s, and I think here Vigen Chetarian could also give his take on that. When thousands of people actually fled Azerbaijan and came to Armenia, and back then we didn't manage to create conditions to welcome them in a way so they want to stay in Armenia. Now we should be able to turn this crisis into opportunity, because a lot of highly qualified, talented people are now in Armenia, and there is a need for international help to integrate them, to give them mid-term and long-term opportunities, to offer them proper accommodation and proper job opportunities. Please, the other members, the other speakers could add something if they want to.
I'd like to add something if I may. And this is something that Tigran and I have been discussing in terms of our activity, right? So just even in discussions, we've been talking about the fact that, a significant portion of these refugees have arrived in Armenia with meager resources. And so they have limited means of supporting themselves. They've endured profound psychological trauma and loss, which significantly impacts, their overall quality of life and ability to recover. They're going to face difficulties in securing employment because of job scarcity in Armenia. And obviously, they've got, so much kind of against them just in terms of, if they wanted to establish their own business, they might not be able to because of lack of capital. So, their ability to meet their own needs becomes a formidable challenge. And while what I'm seeing is, kind of immediate needs being slowly met in terms of finding housing and kind of, the basic support, the elementary kind of needs are being met, not in the most perfect way, but it's kind of, I'm seeing it happen. But in terms of like the mid to long term, as Tigran said, the integration, that kind of support, rehabilitation of these people needs to be addressed. And that's something that Armenia is going to need help with.
Sheila?
Yeah. I mean, my brain just keeps, I'm still in super alert mode. And of course, all of those things are important, but none of them matter if we get invaded. And so for me, the number one priority is maybe we've resigned ourselves to the thought that it's coming. So let's just live under the looming umbrella of war. No, we can't. All efforts have to be on, as much as possible, to make sure that we don't get invaded and attacked. This is where I do see the shift, in the sense that Nagorno-Karabakh, as painful as what just happened was always in the eyes of the international community a disputed region, a breakaway state. Separatism is not popular, and so they didn't get as involved. Even though nobody wants to see an ethnic cleansing, that's definitely a big no-no. The sort of territorial integrity and sovereignty of Azerbaijan factor kept overshadowing the looming threat of ethnic cleansing. In this case, it would be I see Azerbaijan coming. I see them coming. Nobody else does, because they can't believe that not nobody else, but members of the international community are like, no, this is that would be a really big no. Like, that would be really bold. I see them coming because they are emboldened, and I think that every effort needs to be made as much as possible to keep attention on that factor, because we can't develop. Armenia is always going to be stunted if it's constantly having to deal with these kinds of ridiculous threats. It is so criminal. And so I would ask that there always be a space kept to keep eyes on the fact that this isn't over, that this problem isn't solved. It's actually getting worse almost. Do you know what I mean?
I just want to add a little bit off of what Sheila was just saying. I mean, some of the refugees that I spoke to in Goris were being resettled, and I was asking them, for example, why did you choose to go to Alaverdi, which is a city in Armenia's north? And I was told by these people that they were choosing these places because they were not close to the border with Azerbaijan. So that, already gives you the sense of, what these people were leaving, what their state of mind is about what the future will bring, and the fact that the majority of these people prefer to live and settle in Yerevan, for example, or in kind of central areas of Armenia.
Yeah, thank you, Sheila and Karina. We have some other notable additions to our audience, namely Dr. Anna Ohanyan. Shahen, I don't remember your surname, but Shahen was on the ground, and I think his input could also be valuable. All the other peoples who I don't see. Tom Rowley, I believe he has been also actively covering the situation. So if any of you want to chime in, please send a request. We will be very glad to listen to your perspective. Simon John, I believe you are supposed to be a speaker right now. So as soon as you have the opportunity, the technical opportunity, please, the floor is yours. It seems we have technical problems with Simon, but we have a new speaker. Sylvie, please, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for organizing this. Sorry, I joined the conversation a little late, but I do have a question that about the ICC joining or ratifying the ICC. I see a lot of concern from the Armenian side on joining this this body where Azerbaijan and Turkey are not part of the this European body, and it supposedly falls outside the jurisdiction of it to prosecute it. I'm no legal expert, so I would like to hear some thoughts on this.
Sure.
Yeah. So the jurisdiction of the ICC extends to the territory of the state and the nationals of that state that becomes a party to it. So even if Turkey or Azerbaijan or Russia or whoever are not member states of the ICC, if anyone who commits a war crime on the territory of Armenia is liable to fall within the jurisdiction of the ICC, which is why Russia as a non-member state of the ICC, having, committed allegedly, but whatever, war crimes in Ukraine, which has accepted the jurisdiction of the ICC, falls within the ambit of the ICC's jurisdiction. So that's how they were able to issue an arrest warrant for Putin and his Commissioner for Children's Rights. That's sort of how it works, right? So it's not like that's pretty clear. Now the question is more: can the war crimes can the crimes that were committed before a certain date? Normally you can only start investigating or the jurisdiction temporarily in terms of time starts from the moment that the ratification enters into force. So in Armenia's case, we voted to ratify, but it's still going to take some time before it enters into force. The president still has to sign a document, and then once we deposit the instrument of ratification with the ICC, it takes 60 days before it enters into force, and normally it's from that day forward. But we have accepted retroactive temporal jurisdiction dating back to May 2021. And so under Article 12.3, it's a bit technical, but basically we're telling the court, we're going to let you investigate war crimes that committed on the territory of Armenia as of this date. So that's retroactive. And that means anyone, of course, including Armenians, but anyone who commits an international crime on Armenian territory is up for grabs.
Thank you, Sheila. I would urge our distinguished members of the audience to join our conversation. We really need your inputs, your contributions. Please send a request. Mariam Jan, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. This is Mariam Iskajan. I live in Washington, D.C., and my day-to-day job is helping build the capacity of the U.S. refugee resettlement system. And so I just want to second all of the concerns that are being made about especially the long-term challenges that Armenia will face for integrating the refugee population. We're talking about not only issues of permanent housing and employment placing, but also addressing the preservation of cultural and linguistic dialect and all of these other, long-term psychosocial traumas and barriers. Just to give you some context, the United States resettlement cap for the following fiscal year is 125,000 people. So the United States, one of the largest, the largest country in terms of wealth and resources, can only see itself resettling 125,000 individuals within the year. And we're talking about 50 states. So for a small country like Armenia, this is such a ginormous effort. And what we need is from the international level is for Armenia to continue to advocate for this population. And while doing so, to advocate for and mobilize donor support. And that isn't just for short-term assistance, such as food and temporary housing, but also for those long-term commitments. And so UNHCR recognizing these individuals as refugees is very, very important and naturally unlocks funding. It also is part of UNHCR's mandate to help mobilize funding, but we really do need that kind of level of support. And what I have been doing in the last few days has been in conversations with resettlement agencies in the US who have been curious and interested. And some of the questions that they've asked me is, so we need to have a sense of what the needs, we have to have a needs assessment. We have to have a sense of what kinds of financial needs the government of Armenia expects. So hopefully we can get some of that and pushing the government to start announcing that now. Refugee crises happen all over the world every day. And right now there is some focus and attention to what's happening to the people of Artsakh. And so what we want to do is we want to captivate and catch them right now. So that way, it's going to be much more challenging long term. And, the last thing I'll say is there's a lot of problems with big international NGOs is coming in and, doing resettlement. And so, and when I talk about funding, I'm not saying let's just get a bunch of international donors. I think what we want to do is also promote this idea of supporting locally led initiatives and supporting sort of grassroots efforts and innovations and entrepreneurship, including from the refugees themselves. And so in any way that we can do that, I think would be really helpful right now. I'm also happy to start a working group for policy nerds and practitioners if we want to just meet up and talk about these things. And so I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Mariam, for your very valuable comments. I think this is really important to have people who have profound understanding of these new problems we have. And I hope we will be able to work together on solving these issues. We're still waiting for new speakers.
In the meantime, I would like to ask Mariam a question. Mariam, I know you've been working on refugee advocacy in the past. Is there something, I don't know, a lesson that you maybe want to talk about, or like a pitfall that, people working in this field know about, maybe take for granted that the rest of us might not, think about?
Well, I think it's not so much a pitfall on us. There's a pitfall in the global, displacement prevention community. There's a whole global compact on migration and international efforts that have been made that directly call for addressing root causes to displacement. What happened in Nagorno-Karabakh and what's continuing to happen was completely preventable. And we had so many early warning signs. And so I think one lesson is to take these seriously. And when we talk about, displacement prevention, that we can't just be talking about it in abstract theoretical terms, but empirically. And I know for me in the U.S. and what I've been really pushing a lot of folks is to think of it this way. It's just so important. I think the other aspect to this is also just continuing to build solidarity with other communities that have been displaced, that have been uprooted from their homelands, and to do so in ways that are authentic and that can build, long-lasting relationships. And then finally, I think, we've done this well in the last couple weeks, but we can't always talk about numbers. We need to talk about stories, and as we're doing this kind of advocacy, we need to really emphasize that. In the U.S., I'm not to be like this U.S. centric person, but I do live in here. A lot of the refugee advocacy is around bringing people here, giving them temporary protected status. I don't think that's what we should be advocating. I think the people there, very clearly they've been fighting for their lives and enduring the most horrific hardship because they don't want to leave their land. And so the second option is, of course, Armenia. So I think also communicating tangible ways that people can support is so important, because for refugee advocates, the number one sort of calls that are made is for protection and resettlement and whatnot. But I think for Artsakh's case, it's a little bit different, and so we do want to make sure that we emphasize that part.
Thanks a lot, Mariam. We have a new speaker, Armenia Gulejian. Armenia, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for organizing this space. I can just tell you a little bit about myself and get right into my question. I currently work in renewable energy, but in the 2000s, I was mainly working in the Balkans, in Serbia, Kosovo, Bosnia, and so have a little bit of context, I guess, from conflicts in other parts of the world. But my question is really, I gravitated to something that you said, Tigran, which is the fetishizing by the international community by this potential peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And my question about that, and I'm very interested to hear what the other speakers think about this, is one, Azerbaijan kind of an honest party, right? We have seen them not keep their promises as it has to do with the 2020 trilateral agreement. Even if there is some kind of an agreement between the Armenian government and the Azerbaijani government, is that treaty on its own really enough to kind of protect Armenia's borders? Kind of what Sheila was saying a little earlier, that, you know, the territorial integrity of the Republic of Armenia currently is incredibly important, right? I think, Sheila, you said that they're coming. It's just a matter of time. And so I'm kind of interested to hear from the other speakers. One, is Azerbaijan a trustworthy party, even if it is a so-called peace treaty? Will a peace treaty, if it is signed, kind of take attention away to the real threats to Armenia from Azerbaijan, because then the attention will be taken away from kind of the situation? And then the last part of the question is, what other steps can be taken to assure the security of the Republic of Armenia? Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Arminier. A really good question, and that has been probably the main question in Armenia in the last 1 year, when the government has started its policies. I call them misguided policies on Nagorno-Karabakh. So the big question was whether, after all of these concessions, if eventually some sort of peace agreement is signed, Armenia's territorial integrity and sovereignty will be protected. I'm not sure about that. Of course, now when the Karabakh chapter is seemingly closed, there is more possibilities, oddly enough, to sign this treaty, because Karabakh was the elephant in the room. They couldn't agree. So it was a red line for both sides. So despite the fact that the Armenian government has actually lowered the so-called bar a lot, Azerbaijan still wasn't actually willing to compromise. And that was the reason why the negotiations on the peace treaty weren't actually progressing, although we've heard a lot of statements coming from the State Department that the peace treaty is within reach. But you still need to understand that there are a number of other serious differences between the sides. We have the border package, the issue of the occupied territories of Armenia. These territories have been occupied since May 2021, and we are talking about areas of strategic importance. So Azerbaijan occupied these areas to have military edge over Armenia. I'm not sure Azerbaijan is going to actually withdraw its forces from Armenia's occupied territories. We have the issue of these exclaves. And of course, the question you are asking is one of the other main differences. So the Armenian government is insisting on creating some sort of mechanism of implementation of the peace treaty for all the reasons you have just mentioned. So there is no any trust towards Azerbaijan. It is obvious that given the opportunity, Azerbaijan will violate this new document if it's signed. So the Armenian government wants some kind of international guarantees, and mainly from the United States. However, I don't see willingness on the part of the United States. Even if they give assurances, I'm not sure there will be a strong enough reaction if Azerbaijan continues with its policy of coercive diplomacy. Probably there won't be any kind of large-scale invasion, but these salami tactics, as they call it, when they just attack in an area, take control of small part of the territory, and then just calm down a bit, this will probably continue. And we have a lot of other problems, like the issue of this connection through the southern part of Armenia. They call it the Zangezur corridor. It seems that there is some sort of consensus between Moscow and Baku on the opening of these communications. At this point, we're mainly talking about the railway. So the Russian side and the Azerbaijani side argue that the Russian border guard should be in charge of the border control and in charge of the customs services. So a lot of problems. But one thing is already clear. This whole peace treaty agenda is already a failure. If you have a peace process and in the midst of this peace process, you have an actual ethnic cleansing of a territory, then it is obvious that it's a failure. And for too many long, all these mediators have been equating the peace treaty with the actual peace in the region. It is already evident that even if this treaty is signed, you cannot talk about any kind of sustainable peace in the region. So the answer to your question is, of course, Armenia should use all the legal mechanisms to try to utilize the international community's diplomatic support. But unless the military balance between Armenia and Azerbaijan is not at least partly restored, it will be hard to talk about any kind of security or peace in the region. Karina, Sheila, you want to add something?
I actually don't have much to add. I think you've covered that pretty comprehensively.
Yeah, I'll just add that I wrote two pieces on the question, the peace to fail all peace. Basically, given the extremely hostile context in which the peace talks have been taking place, the process is already void. So any eventual treaty is probably already legally void because it's been procured under the threat of use of force. And then in terms of Azerbaijan's trustworthiness, I mean, obviously we see that every promise is broken. There's only bad faith coming in, and it's normal to hope that it'll turn around at some point. But what can I say? There's history speaks for itself, and so at this point, they've broken agreements, and they'll do it again. There's no reason to think that they wouldn't do it again. Is all I can say. So. That's just already clear. I think that's already clear.
Yeah, thank you, Sheila. So please, if anyone else wants to join us, you can send a request. And we have a question in the comment section. Is there any possibility of opening a Western secure transport corridor? If we're talking about the so-called Zangezur corridor, I don't think there is a possibility of any Western presence on it. I mean, everybody understands if this communication opens and there is any kind of international presence on it, it's Russian presence. If we are asking about any other corridors, like economic or transport corridors, not of extraterritorial nature, so at this point, of course, there have been conversations going on about different projects, but I don't think they are too realistic at this point. We have a question.
I think I just want to add on a little bit about what Tigran and Sheila were just talking about. I think one of the problems is the way the Western partners especially just sort of facilitated the events of the last couple weeks. And, instead of kind of, exacting consequences. So, for example, I mean, in the 3 years since the 2020 peace agreement, Azerbaijan has used that time to demand more and more concessions, kind of using its superior position in terms of military power, etc. And at the same time, localized attacks and fighting continued. Armenians were abducted even from Armenia. Azerbaijan was seizing more territory. And the peace talks were just kind of the soundtrack to that violence. And international mediators, and particularly the US and the EU, were simultaneously kind of cheerfully lauding this sort of, bunny ears dialogue between the sides without ever enforcing those consequences as the situation on the ground went from bad to worse. So it's a matter of confronting the way that these partners facilitated the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh and understanding, again, I'm repeating myself, the precedent that this sets internationally for other autocrats around the world.
Thank you, Karina. Do we have any other people who want to join? Azatuhi, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for organizing this panel. So I have a question that is more in my area of expertise, which is kind of material science and engineering. And that is, we know that several international Fortune 500 companies like British Petroleum and Anglo-Asian Mining have a vested interest in Azerbaijan's control of the Nagorno-Karabakh region. And if you look at the stock prices of these two companies, they've jumped significantly since this summer. So my question is, are there any financial recourses either through divestment advocacy or through legal mechanisms to basically hit the companies that are benefiting from the war crimes that Azerbaijan has committed?
Thank you for the question, Azatui. I'm of course not an expert on that, but I'm aware that there is actually a legal proceeding going on against the Anglo-Asian Mining Company. So this is the company that owns most of the mines in Nagorno-Karabakh, starting from 2020. Some of the mines were transferred to them in 2020, and now the Kashen mine, which was the biggest mine and one of the biggest sources of revenue in Nagorno-Karabakh, will most likely be also under their control. So I'm aware of this legal proceeding. I think Simon knows more about that, and he could have told us more, but that's all I know. Anything regarding BP, I don't think there's something going on with BP. I mean, any kind of legal proceeding or campaign. But this company, Anglo-Asian Mining Company, is indeed one of the main beneficiaries of the Azerbaijani aggression of the last several years.
Thank you. That's good to hear. And if you need, technical expertise, if any of the people working on advocacy need technical expertise, I would be happy to help or to find people in my network that can help with that.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have other people who want to join our conversation? Taron, the floor is yours.
Darn, you might be on mute. Maybe check your mic.
Okay, I guess Daron has some technical problems. Piotr, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tigran. Just a quick question. I joined the conversation a little bit late, so apologies if you have touched upon this, but I'm a little bit interested in the broader consequences of this. Obviously, Armenia has called on the CSTO quite a few times, and the Kremlin has essentially just completely dismissed that, leaving Armenia very much in the cold. So a sort of two-parter for anyone who's interested to respond, which is that what do we think this means for the future of just Armenia's longevity? Because some analysts think it's being, encroached on increasingly from quite a few sides. So its only option is to sort of try and hope that the EU and democracy prevails versus getting more and more into the sort of arms of the Kremlin. But also, what does that mean? Part two is what does that mean for the CSTO and just generally the sort of belief in Russia as a genuine force for, I don't know, I wouldn't say good, but a reputable, reliable partner who comes to the aid of those who call upon it. In this case, it's pretty clear that Russia's not interested and going to prioritize its immediate concerns, namely Ukraine. So just very interested to hear any thoughts you might have on those 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you, Piotr. Well, we have been witnessing a very serious crisis in the Armenian-Russian relations for at least a year. This process started last September when Armenian sovereign territory got attacked by Azerbaijan, and back then there was absolutely no reaction from Russia and the CSTO. From that point on, the Armenian government has been trying to diversify its foreign policy relations and its security ties with the outside world. What the government has been trying to do is basically to freeze the membership in the organization. And we have been seeing a lot of steps in that direction. They refused to host the military drills of the CSTO on its own soil. Pashinyan didn't sign the final declaration of the Yerevan summit of the CSTO. Armenia refused to take the quota position of Deputy Secretary General of the CSTO. The CSTO has been trying to send a monitoring mission to Armenia after the September escalation, so that is also not happening. However, it's too early to talk about any kind of fundamental shifts in foreign policy, although if you listen to the Prime Minister's recent addresses, he's already hinting on the possibility of leaving the CSTO, but the problem is there are not actual viable alternatives. I'm saying this already publicly because, it's probably time to talk about this publicly. Several months ago, I believe the US warned the Armenian government not to leave the CSTO because they weren't able to actually offer something viable, offer any alternatives. So the situation is quite difficult. And now, of course, this crisis has been exacerbated by the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh, by the inaction of the Russian peacekeepers. I have several very credible sources on the ground who say that some of the Russian peacekeepers, like units of the Russian peacekeeping force, actually withdrew from several areas where Azerbaijan attacked. So there is a big disillusionment with the peacekeeping force among the Karabakh Armenian population as well. So it doesn't look good. And of course, all the recent developments also deepen the crisis. And you need to understand that Armenia's structural dependency on Russia is still huge. Economic and energy dependency. Now there are already conversations in Armenia, half jokingly, people are saying that probably we need to prepare for the winter because people are expecting that Russia could take some harsh measures against Armenia if this situation remains. So overall, it's a very difficult situation. And as I've already said in my previous reply, the only answer is to actually invest in reforming the armed forces of the Republic of Armenia and trying to at least partly restore the military capabilities that were ruined during the 2020 war. Do you have any other question, or shall we?
Yeah, I have a follow-up if that's all right. But yeah, very quickly. So obviously the UN mission came back. I think it was a couple of days ago. So one part to that is what, if any, relevance can you see the UN having in this? I'm not holding my hopes, if I'm honest. But could there be some kind of broader, more established monitoring mission if Russia were to, say, agree to it through a Security Council resolution? And then second, given the broader dynamics with Israel and Saudi Arabia, and then Israel's shadow war with Iran, and I think just this morning or yesterday night, I saw Iran is considering sending, I can't remember the exact word they used, representatives or something, to the border with Azerbaijan. So I don't know if you or any of the other panelists have thoughts about that dynamic to this, because I think that could be very interesting to see from the Middle Eastern sort of perspective. And the UN. Thank you.
So yeah, I'll just give a brief reply, then I will pass the floor to the other speakers. This so-called UN mission that was sent to Nagorno-Karabakh is very disappointing, because the Armenian expert community and the government of Armenia have been advocating for international presence throughout the blockade, even before that, and they just went there right after the depopulation of Nagorno-Karabakh. And of course, the report they compiled, the statement they issued, is just outrageous, to be honest. They were talking about, they were saying like, we haven't seen any complaint, haven't heard any complaints, while also emphasizing that there's basically no population left there. So it's really problematic, and we need an actual proper international mission to go there and to see what's happening on the ground. I don't think there is a big chance of a UN Security Council resolution. I think the title of this Twitter space describes the situation really well. It's really too late at this point. Probably it could help. I think Sheila might disagree with me, but for me, I mean, the time has already passed, and if something was needed to be done, it should have been done before the actual ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh. Regarding your question about Israel, to be honest, I wasn't very attentive about when you were asking the question. So I'll probably now pass the floor to Karina and Sheila, and then if you want to repeat the question, I will reply to it as well.
I can just kind of quickly address overall, the discursively Armenian society's kind of realization, really, that so much depends on, not these international partnerships and alliances as much as strengthening and reforming Armenia's institutions, and first and foremost the military. As Tigran said, the need to reform the military is one of the top priorities. But I think there's also growing realization that an all of society approach to this is also important. So this is mostly around security. So, this includes information security, like disinformation, and kind of empowering individual users to kind of look at information critically in the face of an existential threat from next door. This is something that becomes really important when, disinformation spreads and could potentially cause panic and et cetera. You need institutions in a society that's kind of able to withstand these assaults. And that's just to give you kind of a insight, into what's kind of being, what the thinking is really from inside.
For the UN, the question about the role of the UN, I know that there's been a lot of uproar and disappointment over that statement. It didn't surprise me though at all either, and it wasn't as for me. It wasn't as bad as people thought. I mean, there was some good elements in there. They were sort of struck by how suddenly people left. The UN again is not what everyone hopes it would be, but the Security Council element was always needed because there was a lack of Azerbaijani consent to the UN's entering or presence in the region. Now they've consented to this, and I don't know. I feel like the most optimistic version of events could be that with Azerbaijan's consent now, maybe a multi-layered UN structure or body can be implemented in the region that would provide a basis for an eventual return. This is the most optimistic that I can see things, and in that sense, it would of course depend on Azerbaijan's genuine consent to let the UN do its job independently, and often that's most unlikely to be the case. If the UN different bodies suggested anything that Azerbaijan didn't want, that wouldn't happen, right? So I don't know. At least there's a bit of room or possibility, given how I think bad it looks for Azerbaijan that all these Armenians left, and maybe to save face, they might be to really prove that they did intend to guarantee the rights and securities of Armenians. They might now allow some sort of presence that would help hold their hand through an eventual return, but it's too early to tell.
Thank you, Sheila. Piotr, if you have a question, but if it's a short one, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just very quickly on that point, Sheila, appreciate comments. From my time working in the UN sphere, we've seen quite a sizable shift now with the pullout likely of the MINUSMA mission in Mali, which maybe frees up some resources and team members. And I have, spoken to some members who were part of the UN of UNMIK, if that's the right pronunciation, of Kosovo, and some of them were saying maybe you could see like an equivalent in this area, because it's sort of UNMIK has been in conjunction with KFOR quite useful, but obviously you'd have to get the Russians and the Chinese particularly, I think, to agree to that. Could a very perhaps, diluted monitoring peace mission in that area have any possibility, or it's just too much Russia's backyard and the UN's not ever going to reach something like that?
No, I don't think we can dream of anything like that. In that sense, because UNMIK it's like a transitional government type body. It's a peacekeeping mission, of course, but the way Azerbaijan handled the situation, there's sort of no more need for a peacekeeping mission there. What could happen is more like a political mission, or some structures from various, whether it's UNHCR and UNESCO and these sorts of more mission light type bodies that would assist in an eventual reconciliation process. But because there are no Armenians left in the region, you don't need peacekeepers to protect the civilian population that is no longer there. It's really brutal. It's really brutal. So this is sort of what I would have hoped would have been in place after a transitional period with some peacekeepers, so that the Armenians would never have been forced to leave. They were forced to leave, so we don't need peacekeepers anymore. That doesn't mean that we can't envisage the possibility for me, the only way that's going to be possible is with regime change in Azerbaijan, and a change where they have a leadership that is genuinely interested in the well-being of this part of the population that has just fled this way. Barring that, it's not genuine, and then there's nothing really left to do other than pretend. And I don't think that's safe for the Armenians to be part of some sham. It's a bit shambolic to keep talking about we need to ensure the rights and securities of the Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh. I mean, they're gone, people. They're gone. So either we're serious or we're not. But the UN has failed, and it's, yeah. I don't know. Sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional now. I have to stop.
Thank you, Sheila. I think it's okay to be emotional, especially in this period of time. I'm, of course, very pessimistic about the prospects of regime change in Azerbaijan, and we see all the other alternatives to the Aliyev regime. Basically, the opposition is probably even more nationalistic than Aliyev. So, yeah, I think that's a theoretical scenario. We have, I think, one last speaker. We will have one last speaker because our time is coming to an end. Sonia, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, hi, thank you for this opportunity. Just speaking from my own experience as a journalist trained in public relations and communication, I think a very important factor is that I think the amount of money that Azerbaijan, as you all know, spends on wining and dining journalists and the media, and the opportunity it's been given by companies as CNN and others. For example, an interview with Hikmet Hayev, the spokesperson of the Aliyev regime, the whole info war thing that is going on from Azerbaijani side. I think that is something that, I'm not in any position to advise Armenia on anything, but just from my own perspective, I think that's a very, very important thing to realize that and to, in one way or another, act upon it. Because if I see, my article will be published today on the role of the media from the past few years. First of all, I'm one of those people that couldn't get anything published, hardly anything published. We all know the quality of free press in Azerbaijan, which is non-existent. The threats towards, one of them is here, Neil Howard, the way they're smearing his reputation, Lindsay Snell, other people. There's so many things going on in the communication area, and I think it would be wise to have some sort of a reaction or a plan or anything ready, because I think this will only get worse. They will cover things up. They will, start searching more contact with journalists, trying to get better press and everything. I was just shocked for my article today, when I was doing research and found all the things. For example, in the Dutch press, they say Turkey has a very problematic relationship history with Armenia, in which they meant the genocide, which 1 to 1.5 million people were murdered, let alone the women abducted and forcibly converted. So, I think just from my own perspective, expertise, I think this is something that really needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Sonia. Karina, Sheila, if you want to add something to Sonia's comment, go ahead.
Yeah,
if
absolutely. Thank you, Sonia, for that question. Actually, it's something that I've been really interested in, and in particular, disinformation and the sort of delegitimization of kind of legacy media around the world over the last 10, 15 years. And the fact that disinformation campaigns can pose a greater risk to fragile democracies contending with kind of complex historical, societal, economic issues like Armenia, and in particular in context experiencing conflict like Armenia again. So, this is something that the Armenian government is working on. So there's like an information kind of strategy. It's very imperfect. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on it. And in particular around digital information and information security online. And there's some best practices that, experts in Armenia, as well as the government, have been looking at, including in the United States and in Nordic countries, where, again, and I'm mentioning this whole of society approach again, to combat disinformation and kind of protect information security in the country. So, this is something that is part of that battle against, the phenomenon that you're talking about, this kind of whining and dining of journalists. The overwhelming majority of whom are like new journalists who aren't super professional. They've just been kind of pulled into this region in this context that they don't really know much about. So that's just a phenomenon that is characteristic of what's happening, and it's a lot more work needs to be done on it, and I hope we do that.
Thank you, Karina. Yeah, that's actually one of the areas of our interest, of our organization's interest, and hopefully we'll be able to work on that in the future. I think Neil wanted to add something, and we will give him the chance to actually wrap up our conversation. Neil, can you join us? Neil, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on that too, because that's pretty much the field of my expertise. And I can say I had a few points to add to Sonia's comment there. Something that I think I could say better than anyone. As a freelance journalist, living and writing on the Caucasus for the better part of a decade now, and pitching stories entirely as a freelancer. Two things were that stuck out to me was one, the shift in media attention over the last week, 2 weeks here. I mean, with the blockade, was in the first couple of weeks of the blockade. I was pulling teeth trying to get anyone to take a piece on it. I got over a dozen rejections from places that I published with many times. It was almost impossible to place something. Whereas, last week, finally, everyone woke up. As it tends to go, that's the catastrophe happens, and then there's media attention. But I went from everyone places ask me for anything I can get them. I gave myself over 50 interviews easily last week to places like BBC, Deutsche Welle, lots of other Western broadcasters again and again. So finally, there's this. There is international media attention on this. And then the second thing, I think, the content of that has also shifted a lot. Whereas before, so much of it was, you don't even have in your pieces, Azerbaijan, we don't know what's happening. Armenia says it's a blockade. Azerbaijan denies it's a blockade. How can we know what's going on? Whereas, and these two countries that are far away and it's complicated, and isn't one of them sort of a Russian ally, but the other one's also sort of a Russian ally, so we don't know. Better treat them both as like just a he said, she said thing. Now, and they're equally good and bad. Now I've seen, like, in the last week or two, it seems to be this broad realization, like, yes, Azerbaijan has just done a very evil thing. They are pretty much unequivocally the bad guys in this situation, and I see it both in the tone of the questions that I get asked and the interviews that I have asked for myself, and then in terms of what publications are looking for in this. So I do think there's been a big shift in that.
Can I just shortly add, don't forget that in Afrin, in Syria, Turkey has already caused a demographic change. So these things are happening and the media are looking away. And I think also with, Syunik, probably, perhaps an invasion there, I think this is really important. And I'm, Karina, really, and Tigran, happy that you just informed me that obviously you are looking at that, because this InfoWar thing I think is really a big thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody who has joined us today, who participated in the conversation, who has been listening to our conversation. Unfortunately, our time is up and we need to wrap up the Twitter space. The space will be actually uploaded to YouTube as well, so everybody who hasn't been able to listen to it from the beginning can listen to it later. So I would like to thank Dr. Karina Avedisian, a senior analyst at the Regional Center for Democracy and Security, Sheila Palin, international human rights lawyer, our intern Stephanie for participating and for organizing this Twitter space. Thank you and goodbye.